There he is. Okay, great.
Hi, Pete.
Hi, Mark.
Hi, Pete.
Hi.
Yeah. I'm going to turn off Facebook because I won't need it. I was on here because at first it looked like maybe Zoom wasn't working. And I'll turn off my mail because all that can interfere. Yeah.
I'm not sure if we're live on Facebook yet, but
I'm trying to turn it on right now.
okay. Yeah, just give me my cue whenever it's ready.
Yep. My password thing is not wanting to come on. Of course. Sorry, guys. Something is wrong with my, there it is. Preparing. This did not take so long yesterday.
It's okay. It's a new thing. We're
Yeah.
all learning today.
Uh, okay. Should be it.
Okay, yeah, I see that we're live now, so
Fantastic.
Ja, ik kan niet praten, want ik zit te zoomen met Briarbush. Het gaat over vervuiling van zakken en plastic. En daar gaan ze nou even over praten, oké?
Ja.
Dus
Je komt de spulletjes vandaag niet ophalen dan.
nee, ik had gedacht woensdag.
Ja, maar ik was van de
Are we able to mute
Yeah.
the?
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, if you want to say, go
Right.
ahead and say good morning, Lily, you can.
Yeah. Okay, great. So hello, everyone. Good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you are. And welcome to our mini conference that's hosted by the WAVE Initiative at Sciences Po Reims, which is a student organization tied to the Surfrider Foundation in collaboration with Mark Fallon at the Briarbush Nature Center in Abington, Pennsylvania. So today we're going to have a conversation about the basics of water health and plastic pollution. And we'll leave a few minutes at the end for any questions that you might have. Or if you want, you can just unmute yourself and ask your question. But before we begin, Mark, if you'd like to briefly introduce yourself and Briarbush.
Thanks. So yes, I'm the director at Briarbush Nature Center. We are a environmental education facility very close to Philadelphia in Pennsylvania in the United States. And Lily grew up in the town where we are and has moved on to study in Reims. So we were very grateful when she contacted us and wanted to speak about environmental issues close to her heart and her passion and what she's doing in France. So this is just a fantastic opportunity to talk to people around the world about something that's so important around the world globally. So yeah, take it away, Lily. Thank you so much.
Great. Yeah, and thank you. So the first topic that we'll cover is about water health. So what is it and the current issues surrounding it? So first, would you be able to please explain to us what nitrites and nitrates are and how they contribute to water health?
Sure. So nitrates and nitrites are both nitrogen compounds, organic nitrogen compounds that are formed mostly by bacteria naturally in the soil, but also manufactured artificially as compounds for fertilizer and other industrial uses. And so nitrogen is a very important plant food. So without nitrogen, plants cannot make any proteins, so they're not able to grow. So nitrogen is involved in water pollution because if it flows off, say, a farm field or down drains, or especially nitrogen is a big component of urine. So anywhere there are animals, concentrated like on a farm, that's a large production of nitrogen. And of course, a city full of humans produces a great deal of nitrogen. And all of that can end up in waterways if it's not contained or treated in some way. So from a city, most cities in the world now, a lot of that nitrogen simply flows through pipes and into waterways. Some more modern cities have waste treatment facilities that will capture some or all of that nitrogen before returning the water to waterways, but that's pretty expensive and doesn't always happen. Even in places that do have that kind of water treatment, especially in Europe, many, and in the United States, but especially in Europe, many of the old cities have what's called a combined sewer system. So during normal times, the wastewater from homes and businesses go through pipes into a water treatment plant, which catches the waste, treats it, and then returns it treated to waterways. However, those same pipes are shared with storm drains. So when it rains really, really hard, then all of that storm water sort of floods those pipes. It mixes with the sewage, and because it's overflowing, that all goes straight into the river. So, that can, during storm events, become a huge load of nitrogen. Now, why would it be bad to have plant food in the water? You would think, that'd be good for all the plants that grow there. There's phytoplankton, plant plankton, and submerged weeds and things that grow in waterways. And of course, they do all the things that plants do. They feed the rest of the ecosystem, and they also produce oxygen. The problem is when you have a huge bloom of algae or other plants in the water, they use up all that nitrogen very, very quickly. And they also use up all the oxygen in the water. And when the nitrogen is gone, even if they're producing oxygen, they begin to die. And then bacteria eat them up. They start to rot. And the bacteria uses up all the oxygen. So you have this sort of, boom and bust, where you get tons and tons of plant life, and then literally like a day later, there'll be very low or even no oxygen left in the water. So aquatic life that can move, fish, larger animals can sometimes move away from those areas, and they do, but in other cases, the areas are so huge, and then always there are what we call sessile, or things that can't really move through the current. They live on the bottom, or they just drift around. And so those animals are often killed by these events.
Great. Okay, thank you. And then, so we have nitrites and nitrates, but then what about pH, which is another aspect of water health? Can you explain to us how that fits into water health, and also what is ocean acidification? What are its causes?
Sure. So pH is a measure, it's a scale of how basic or alkaline a solution is to how acidic it is. So things like dish soap are slightly basic, and lemon juice is fairly acidic, right? So basic things are kind of bitter. So things like coffee and a lot of medications are slightly basic, and acid things are sour. So within a certain range, like even your body can have acids and alkalines in them. But if you get, further up or down on that range, and some living things have a smaller range that they can fit into, especially aquatic animals, because, they're not just drinking water, they're living in it. So, certain animals have to live within a fairly neutral range of pH. And pH actually interacts with nitrogen compounds. It can increase or decrease how good they are at feeding plants. It can also interact somewhat with the oxygen levels in water. But in terms of, larger kind of global issues, pH can be a very important indicator of water quality and water health in small waterways, creeks and streams and rivers. But there is also a global issue with the oceans turning more acid right now. Ocean acidification is sort of the, the shadow sibling, the shadow, evil sister of global climate change. Because climate change, of course, everybody knows, is caused by increases in carbon dioxide in the air. So the more carbon dioxide there is in the air, the more that carbon dioxide actually dissolves in water. So we've all seen carbon dioxide dissolved in water. When you open a can of soda, all those bubbles come out. That is carbonation. So they've forced a whole bunch of carbon dioxide into that water by pressurizing it. You take the pressure off and some bubbles come out. But even the ocean, the lakes, the surface interacts with the air, and some of the carbon dioxide dissolves into that water. You don't see the bubbles because it's dissolved. It's like pouring salt into something. You stir it up, it disappears. So when carbon dioxide dissolves into the water, it forms a weak acid. It's very slightly acidic. It's called carbonic acid. And because the levels of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere have gone up so sharply since the Industrial Revolution, the entire ocean is getting slightly more acidic. But even very slight changes in the entire ocean can be, devastating to marine life. For instance, you have the Great Barrier Reef on the east coast of Australia. It spans hundreds of miles, really thousands, over 1,000 miles. And in the past 30 years, half of that reef has died. So, I mean, and it's almost 100% due to these changes in the acid level of the oceans. So this is a huge global problem that is associated with, carbon in the air, and is often, either ignored or misunderstood, or not even, people don't even realize that this is a problem. And it really is, it's an existential threat to the oceans, which, we depend on for food, for oxygen, for all kinds of things.
Right, yeah. So you talked about how wildlife, even just in the oceans or waterways or around it, are affected by these three different things: pH levels, nitrites, and nitrates. So then more personally, could you go maybe more in depth about how water health affects us? Or in other words, why should we be concerned about it?
Sure. So in the oceans, people get millions and millions of tons of food from the oceans every year. And so these animals like coral they are the basis of the food chain for fish and shellfish that are coming out of those tropical waters where they live. And in temperate waters, things like phytoplankton and zooplankton, animal and plant plankton, feed the ecosystems there. And they are all affected by this ocean acidification. So if you have the breakdown of sort of the base of the food web, that cascades up further through the trophic levels. So, you have a half as many coral around, you're going to have, exponentially less fish, because the small fish need tons of coral to eat, and then the bigger fish need tons of small fish to eat. And so, if you start at the base, the top levels of the food chain just begin to disappear. And we see that every year. Commercial fisheries are harvesting less and less out of the ocean, and are allowed to harvest less and less. Regulated fisheries are being more regulated, more strictly regulated in many, many countries. And then unregulated fisheries are just, they're disappearing in a very short time. Those fish are being fished out. They're not replacing themselves. So food is a major issue when it comes to global water quality. And then also, oxygen, if you like to breathe. Of course, trees are important, right? People call them the lungs of the planet, but the oceans actually contribute more oxygen than all the trees combined on the planet to the atmosphere. And that's due to, these little tiny plant plankton, these little phytoplankton near the surface of the oceans, lakes and streams as well, but mostly the oceans are producing oxygen, and that oxygen is coming out of solution into the air. So if you like to breathe, ocean acidification, yes, ocean acidification is an issue. And of course, pathogens, so, human health due to disease and things like that, all of these things, if you, in drinking water, if you have these big algal blooms, so like lots and lots of plant plankton blooms and then dies, then you have a huge bloom of bacteria in the water. And that could be in your drinking water, especially in places where the drinking water is not well filtered or, decontaminated. And then the algae themselves, certain species can be toxic or produce toxic chemicals, which are very difficult to remove from drinking water. And of course, that can also kill fish and shellfish.
Great. Okay. Super helpful answers. I hope everyone has learned a lot from that. I know I have. But if there are any more questions about the topic, you can let us know in the chat or the comments. And again, we'll have time at the end to respond to a few. But for now, we're going to move on to the second topic, which is about plastic pollution. So the first question I have for you, Mark, is that we often hear about microplastics, but some people aren't 100% sure about what they are. So could you explain to us where they come from and why they're a problem?
Yes, so microplastics are just what you would imagine. They're microscopic pieces of plastic, and they are produced in two ways, really. One is they get into waterways, so you can imagine, in a big city, you have lots of maybe plastic bags on the ground or something like that, and so they get into these cities' waterways. And they begin to just get ripped apart as they drag on sticks or rocks or things like that. They slowly break down and move downstream and end up, in oceans or lakes or larger rivers. So that's one way that plastics break down and become smaller pieces. But another way that people don't realize as much is due to the sun. So plastics are not generally very UV stable. They tend to immediately, within hours of being put in the sunlight, they begin to break down on the surface and shed microscopic pieces of plastic. So, these are different sources of plastics getting into the water. So, even if you have a plastic bottle on the street, it is already shedding these microscopic pieces of plastic, and every time it rains, any of that water that goes to a waterway is gathering microplastics. So you may have heard of these, giant islands, floating islands of plastic in the ocean. Well, they're really more like a plastic soup in general. There are some big solid pieces of them, but mostly they're made of very small or even microscopic pieces of plastic concentrated by ocean currents that are going around and around. And it's, sort of like the drain in your tub, in your shower, concentrating all those things in a part of the ocean.
Okay, thank you. And then, so can you talk about what number 1 and number 2 plastics are? What's the difference between them?
So number 1 and number 2 plastics are very, very similar, actually. They're both what they call PE or polyethylene plastics. They are the most recyclable, actually, of any of the plastics, and they're generally used for food. So bottled drinks is one of the most common uses for number 2 plastics, number 1 and number 2. And again, they're one of the most recyclable types of plastic, easily recyclable types of plastic. But even when we talk about recycling of plastics, it becomes really problematic because unlike some other substances, say glass or metal, or even paper in many ways, those substances can be, broken down, smashed up, melted, or broken down, mushed up and into pulp in the case of paper, and then reused to make almost the exact same thing, right? You can take glass, melt it, and make another bottle out of it. With plastics, that is rarely the case. And there's a couple reasons for that. One is these plastics are contaminated with the substances that go into them. So the food, so it takes an immense amount of water to wash those plastics before they can be processed. It takes a lot of fuel to bring those plastics to a recycling center. You know, they're very, very lightweight. So if you load up an entire, you know, big truck with plastic, it's really not a lot of plastic, right? Even if you try and crush it and compact it. And so you're using up all this fuel just to move around this stuff that is very, very lightweight. So it uses a lot of water. It uses a lot of fossil fuels, usually, to bring them to a recycling center. And then, you know, you have to melt it down, and then it gets sent to manufacturers. So that's more fuel, moving this light stuff around. And, you know, and then it often cannot be made into the exact same thing. So they might process number one and number two into something that's more solid, something harder like building materials, or thicker, larger tubs for foods and things like that. But they often can't make the exact same thing. They might make it into clothing. So number one and number two can be spun into synthetic fabrics. But once they are recycled into something else, often those new products are not recyclable, right? So you can't take your fleece back to a recycling center like you can a bottle, a water bottle. So most people talk about plastics as being downcycled instead of recycled. So they get recycled maybe once, and then they go into the waste stream. And other types of plastics, so number 3 through 7 or 8 sometimes, generally are almost not recyclable anymore. And really that's because the market for those plastics has just bottomed out. China used to be the biggest recycler of plastics, and they have decided not to gather sort of mixed up plastics. It was just costing too much for them to figure out how to separate these kinds of plastics into usable, sellable bits to be recycled. So basically, in you know, at least in the United States, in the past 5 years or so, you know, municipalities, cities, and towns are still collecting all of those types of plastic, and then they are throwing them away. And which takes even more energy than just throwing them in the garbage in the first place, because they have to be separated. But people now are used to putting everything in one recycle bin, and if you tell them not to, they're just going to stop, and then you don't get the glass and metal recycling, you don't get the number 1 and 2 plastic recycling. So, you know, most places are still encouraging people to put everything into a recycle bin because it works better in the end that way. Great.
And so now that you've taught us about the different types of plastics and the issues with their quote unquote recyclability, I'm going to ask your opinion for this next question. So do you think that the fight against plastic pollution is more important in the cities, so where most of the plastic is produced and used, or do you think the fight is more important in maybe rural areas or near the waterways itself where the plastic ends up?
So that's a really good question. Of course, you know, you always want to start at the head of a river, right? This is an analogy, but it's easier to control something from the start. So if you can control the production or the purchasing, the use of plastics, then you can fix the problem further downstream. So really, the best way to fight this issue is to reduce. We all know this sort of, you know, the triangle for recycling. It's reduce, reuse, and recycle. Well, the most important one is to reduce, right? If you use less stuff, there will be less stuff that you have to reuse or recycle. And so that is especially true with plastics because, as we talked about, you can't really recycle it. So one of the biggest problems with plastics, really, plastics are amazing materials. They are lightweight, they are durable. They basically, unless you put them in the sunshine, they never break down. And even then, they just turn into tiny little pieces. So they are, flexible. They can be made flexible. They can be made into all kinds of shapes. So there are some really amazing and life-saving applications for plastics, right? They are also important for getting people around, moving people around, sharing information. Your computer that you're on right now is made, a lot of it is plastic, right? So we couldn't be doing this without plastic. The problem really is mostly these sort of throwaway plastics that are totally unnecessary. So do you need a plastic bag to take your groceries home? No. Do you really need plastic to drink a bottle of water? No. In most developed countries anyway, developed cities, the tap water is treated and regulated much more heavily than bottled water. So your tap water is actually in most developed countries is safer than bottled water. It's next to free compared to bottled water. And it doesn't come in a plastic bottle that you're going to throw in a river. So, it's looking for these uses of plastic that are not really necessary to human health, to human, sharing of information, transportation. Those are the things that, personally, I think should be prioritized for plastics, and the other uses should be heavily regulated, if not banned in some way. And there are many, cities around the world that are have either considered or have already passed bans on things like plastic bags. However, interestingly, there is a connection here between the pandemic and plastics. I just read an article this morning that an estimated 1.5 billion masks, surgical masks, have ended up in the ocean in the last year alone. And many cities that had restrictions on using plastic bags at like the grocery store have now rolled those back because they think it's dangerous for people to bring their own bag to the grocery store, which evidence shows the contrary. It's very unlikely for you to get COVID from somebody else's grocery bag, So, something that has been this global and happened for, just over a year now, that can actually change culture going forward. So people have gotten very used to just throwing things out and using them once because of this fear of, and sometimes justified. Obviously, you're not going to pick up somebody else's surgical mask and put it on. But, this fear of contracting germs from reusing things. So we'll see what kind of impact it might have in the future.
Right. So then what advice would you give to maybe university or high school students to reduce their plastic consumption so we don't have to, recycle as much? So what are some good ways to make a change and help fight for plastic reduction and improved water health?
Yeah, so there's two things that I would recommend. First is you can change your own behavior. So you can make sure that you have a cloth bag to bring to the grocery store, always. Keep in your pocket or keep on your bike or keep in your car, and always bring it with you. You never know when you're going to need it. It is stronger than the plastic bags. It fits more than the plastic bags, and you can take it anywhere. So that's like number one. Number two is not to buy drinks in plastic bottles. get yourself a stainless steel water bottle and carry that everywhere you can. And number 3 is really to look for chances to purchase things that don't use plastic packaging, which is very difficult because almost everything does these days. And that sort of brings me to my second piece of advice, and that is really these changes, everybody could make a little bit of a change in their own life, and that probably would make a difference. But these changes, this system is so big, and it's driven by industry, it's driven by profit, really. And the only way that it's going to change really is through regulation, government regulation. So my second piece of advice is to do just what you're doing, to gather together and to make your voice heard that, you want to prioritize the beneficial uses of plastic, and you want to get rid of the non-essential uses of plastic. And so, anyone on the planet can start talking about that and pushing leaders around the world, or becoming leaders yourself, especially at a place like Sciences Po. I'm hoping that all the graduates from Reims are going to spread out into government worldwide and begin to change these policies. So yeah, so that's my second piece of advice, is to be an advocate for policies that eliminate non-essential uses of plastic.
Great, and that was a perfect note to end on, I think. So, thank you so much for your responses today. So my time is done right now to ask you questions, but we can take like 5-ish minutes to respond to any questions that people might have on Facebook. So I can't see them right now, but.
Yeah, same with me. Carl Philippe, can you see any
I can
questions
see the
on
questions
Facebook?
on Facebook. So I can ask the questions if that's needed.
That's perfect.
That's great.
Okay, so one question here asking, would a quick radical change of our way of life be enough to solve this problem of warming of oceans and its many consequences? First question, so we can go
So
off.
yeah, there is no quick fix. It took decades to get into this problem, and it's going to take decades to change this problem. But it's things like the Paris Accord that will begin to be a solution. And those changes only came from regular people just yelling at their governments that they wanted this to change. And so that's really what it's going to take. It's going to take going on social media, writing emails, making phone calls, creating relationships, running for offices, getting elected, and trying to make systemic changes that way. You can definitely make many instant changes in your own life. I encourage people always to, use the bus or the train or your bicycle ahead of other modes of transportation. That can make a huge difference, but really everyone has to do that, and that's difficult.
Perfect, thank you. And then we have another question being, how can we convince people to stop using water in plastic bottles?
I don't know. It's going to take, maybe doing interviews like this. It's going to take people who are more creative than I am online to, create content that convinces people that this is important. It's going to take, again, fighting for policy change that limits or bans the use of those type of materials. So all of those things combined.
Yes, I think that was it for now. So if anyone has any more questions, feel free to ask before we round off, either in the Zoom, the participants here in Zoom, or on Facebook.
I think we'll give like maybe 30 seconds to 1 minute for more questions, I guess.
All right.
Okay, well, I guess we can conclude this mini conference, which has been really amazing. I hope everyone learned something today, and also maybe got inspired to do some activist work. But yeah, just once again, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, you're very welcome, and it was really a pleasure for me too. And I'll say bonne soirée for everyone in France, and you know, keep up the work.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so the live ended?
Yep.
Okay, great.
Well
Oh,
done.
that was really awesome.
Yeah.
For especially for our first time doing this, like for hosting a conference, and also for you guys using the stream. I think it went pretty smoothly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, quite a lot of people, like around 20 people watching on Facebook as well. So that's a very good average all over.
Not bad. So yeah, I mean, I'm very interested in you know, your work over there, and I wish you luck. And we
Thank you.
will start following you on Instagram. And I know you guys as students are very, very busy. So I applaud you for, you know, going outside of your work with school and trying to make the world a better place. So
Thank you.
good
I
luck to you.
definitely,
Yeah.
yeah. So I was just gonna say, I definitely owe Briarbush a visit, like the second I get back
that
from
would
France. It's my first on my list.
That would be formidable. I would love to. I'd love to have you come over here and have a chat. Yeah, and get in touch if you want to do anything else for fun. It was nice to meet you, Philippe, and
Yeah, thank you.
you know, keep in touch.
Well,
Well,
thank
welcome. You have a place to stay if you come to Philadelphia.
you.
Honestly,
I'll be in the US East Coast this summer, so I will, if I'm ever in the Philadelphia area, I will stop by.
Should definitely come.
Yeah.
Great city. Okay.
all right. Take
Well,
care.
I'm gonna go then. I hope you have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you again, and goodbye.
Goodbye.